I never expected to hear Ken say, "I wish I had kids too." It caught me off guard. Ken had always blamed me for us not having children, acting as if it was entirely my fault, like he was the victim, wanting kids but unable to have them because of me. Even more shocking was discovering that he was secretly seeing my sister while pretending to work overtime. They think they're getting away with it, but their time is running out. One day, at Stacy's new house, I decided to confront the truth. I looked at the surprised Ken and said, "This child is yours." His face froze in shock, like a deer caught in headlights. I continued, "I believe we should take responsibility for our actions. I don't intend to keep pretending I don't know. I'm Maddie, just a regular housewife working part-time as a cashier at a supermarket. I met my husband, Ken, through a friend's introduction. My first impression of him was that of an ordinary businessman. He works for a nationally expanding trading company and moved to this area 3 years ago for a job transfer. I remember when he asked me, 'Is this your hometown, Maddie? If it's okay, could you recommend some local places? I'm in charge of finding a venue for an upcoming company Christmas party, and I'm struggling.' I replied, 'Yes, I've lived here since I was a child. Actually, there's a superb Italian restaurant nearby that would be perfect for the party. My hobby is visiting gourmet food places, and I'm good at finding new and delicious spots.' That's how Ken and I quickly became friends, bonding over restaurant recommendations. I'm not great at talking to men, but Ken took the lead, and we seem to get along fine. Next time, I'll find another delicious place. I hope it suits your taste, Maddie," Ken said. "Thank you. For me, it's more important who I eat with than what I eat, so I'm really happy to be invited by you, Ken." "Does that mean eating with you makes the meal more enjoyable and delicious?" I asked, feeling a little shy but excited. "I'm looking forward to the next time," he replied with a smile. I had always been clueless about love and had never had a serious relationship with a man, so I was thrilled when Ken asked me out. I thought he might make me happy. Around the same time, my friends started getting married, and then Ken proposed to me. "I'm not perfect, but I want to make Maddie the happiest. Let's get married," he said. "If it's with you, I'm happy. Let's take care of each other from now on," I agreed. And so, I married Ken, finally reaching what I thought was the pinnacle of happiness. Ken asked me to dedicate myself to our home, so with some regret, I quit my job. Unfortunately, that happiness didn't last. About a year after our marriage, I felt as if I had woken up from a dream. "I've been thinking lately, I really want a child with Maddie, but we haven't been blessed with one yet," Ken said one day. "True, that's right," I replied, though it was painful to admit. Even after a year of marriage, we hadn't been able to conceive. Honestly, pregnancy depends on luck and timing. Just because we hadn't conceived in a year didn't mean we had to be disappointed. I thought someday we would have a child and live as a family with children. However, Ken seemed to have a different idea. "Isn't it abnormal not to get pregnant even after a year?" he asked, his tone laced with frustration. "Is it abnormal? But I think it's about luck and timing, not necessarily abnormal," I responded, trying to stay calm. "Then why haven't we been blessed with a child?" he demanded. "I don't know. Shall we wait a bit longer?" I suggested, but Ken shook his head vigorously and glared at me. "I get it. Maybe you have a problem, Maddie," he said, his voice cold and accusatory. "That's not possible," I murmured, but doubt had already crept into our marriage, and the cracks were beginning to show. I was stunned when Ken suddenly said something unexpected. "Problem? Why would you think that?" I asked, feeling a twinge of unease. What else could it mean if we haven't gotten pregnant even after a year of marriage? "There must be some problem," he replied, his tone insistent. "There isn't any particular issue, but if you're concerned, should we get checked at a specialized clinic?" I suggested, trying to stay composed, though his words left me with an uneasy feeling. Truthfully, I had been a little concerned myself. Friends had mentioned that early checks were a good idea, so I immediately made an appointment and went to the clinic for an explanation. At the clinic, they explained that tests were necessary for both the husband and wife since infertility could be caused by either partner. This made sense to me, and I went home to discuss it with Ken. "So, the cause of infertility can lie with either the woman or the man?" I said, hoping he would understand. "I see," he replied absently, his mind seemingly elsewhere. "Ken, you also need to get tested." "Which day would work for you?" I asked. "Me get tested?" Ken was visibly surprised. "Yes, as I just explained, you need to be tested too," I reiterated. But Ken's face twisted in annoyance. "I'm too busy to spare time for that." Besides, there's no way there's a problem with me, he snapped. I was curious as to why he was so certain, but I decided it would be pointless to argue. So, I spoke as calmly as I could. We can't be sure there's no problem without checking. It seems we can't proceed with treatment unless both of us go to the clinic. He scoffed. Are you doubting me? I've lived healthily for 35 years. There's no way anything's wrong with me. Stop joking around. With that, he left the room. I couldn't understand why he was so adamant that he wasn't the cause. After all, it was Ken who first expressed his desire to have children. So why was he refusing to get tested? After that conversation, Ken's attitude toward me changed completely. He began complaining about every little thing. His dissatisfaction seemed endless, from house cleaning to grocery shopping. One day, he found a receipt I had kept for managing our finances, frowned, and asked with an annoyed expression, "What's this? What did you buy?" "What do you mean, suddenly bringing this up?" I replied, confused by his abrupt accusation. "Spending this much at the supermarket, you must be wasting money," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Wasting money," I echoed, feeling the sting of his words. His criticism was relentless, and I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the man I married. "I always buy a week's worth of groceries at once, which is why it costs this much. It's always been like this," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. But Ken slammed the receipt down on the table. "Excuses are no good. I've heard some housewives manage a monthly food budget of $150. Maybe you need to try harder," he retorted. Keeping the food budget to $150 was nearly impossible while ensuring we had nutritious and balanced meals. Since getting married, I had been doing my best to prepare delicious meals within a limited budget, focusing on both health and cost. But Ken didn't seem to appreciate the effort. Actually, when I lived alone during university and even as a working adult, it never cost this much for food, he said dismissively. "But living together as a couple naturally increases expenses," I replied, trying to reason with him. "Excuses are a sign of incompetence. If you can't manage household duties properly, then working outside is out of the question," he snapped. I had quit my job when we got married because Ken wanted me to stay at home. But now, with a smirk, he added, "That's right, someone who can't even manage household duties has no business working outside." His words cut deep. I thought to myself, I didn't realize you could be so cruel. "What's wrong? Are you going to say I'm the bad one?" Ken continued. "The wives of my colleagues all have jobs. You're probably the only one who doesn't work." He criticized me by comparing me to people I had never even met. Before we got married, Ken had never spoken this way, but now things were getting worse by the day. I couldn't understand when or why he had changed so much. It was difficult for me, with no special skills or recent experience, to suddenly start working. The pressure to find a job and the constant criticisms from Ken were causing my stress to accumulate day by day. But I knew that clashing with Ken wouldn't solve anything, so I suppressed my frustrations and tried to get through each moment as best I could. One day, while I was at home, my smartphone chimed with a notification. "That smartphone is annoying," Ken muttered. "Sorry, I'll put it on silent," I replied quickly. "Do you even have friends who would contact you?" he sneered, turning a simple notification into yet another criticism. "It's from my sister," I said quietly, trying to hide how much his words stung. I have a sister who is 3 years younger than me. Although we aren't very close, we maintain a moderate relationship. We've always been quite different in personality and interests, which has made it challenging for us to connect deeply. In the past, she often involved me in her schoolwork and club activities, which sometimes felt like a burden. "Your sister Stacy, right? What does she want?" Ken asked. "Stacy had a baby," I replied. "Oh, she mentioned before that she wanted you to bring me to meet her baby," Ken said. "Yes," I confirmed. "We briefly met when I visited my parents. The baby was adorable. Actually, we've been invited to their new home." "That sounds nice. I'd like to see Stacy again after such a long time," Ken said, showing an unusual interest. It was rare for him to express interest in meeting my family or friends, so I decided not to dwell on it too much. We planned to visit Stacy and her husband John's new house. John, like Ken, is a busy businessman, but he was home when we arrived. "We're here," I announced as we entered. "How are you feeling, Stacy?" "I'm fine, thank you for coming," Stacy responded warmly. "John is here too." "Yes, I took the day off," John said with a smile. "I'm actually on a 3-month paternity leave. It was tough to arrange work." Well, you've been so busy and hardly home these last 2 years, Stacy noted. Yes, I feel bad for making you feel lonely during that time, John said kindly, looking at Stacy. Stacy, the clingy one, and John, the dependable one, seemed like the perfect couple. Stacy cradled the newborn and offered her to us. Do you want to hold the baby? Just make sure to support the head firmly. As I gently held the baby, I could smell her faint, sweet scent. Ken leaned in and murmured, "She's so cute. I wish I had a baby too." Given Ken's secret, I was stunned to hear him say that. I knew this was the perfect time to address it, so I decided to speak up. "What? Isn't this child yours?" I said loudly, intentionally drawing everyone's attention. Ken's eyes widened in surprise, and Stacy and John looked at me in disbelief. "Come on, stop with the insensitive jokes," Ken said, clearly flustered. "Why would you say that? It's impossible for this child to be mine." Stacy argued, "That's ridiculous. Why would you think that?" They probably thought I was making baseless claims, but I knew more than they realized. "Actually, I know everything," I said. "John is here, but can we discuss this now?" John, sensing the seriousness in my tone, suggested, "Let's hear what Maddie has to say." "Thank you," I said, looking at Ken. "You always talked about wanting kids." Ken looked taken aback by the sudden focus on him. "Of course, it's natural for a man to want his own children," he replied. "True," I continued. "But why would that mean Stacy's child is mine?" Ken asked. "What does that have to do with anything?" I pulled out my laptop from my bag. "You borrowed my old computer once, remember? You said yours was being repaired." "Maybe I did, but what's your point?" Ken asked, his expression growing uneasy. "When you returned it, you forgot to log out," I said. Ken's face turned pale, and he was at a loss for words. "No way," he muttered. I had been suspicious of Ken's behavior for a while, his sudden department changes, coming home late every night, claiming to work overtime. It all seemed odd. When I got my computer back, the pieces began to fall into place. I was stunned when I stumbled upon Ken's new emails on my computer. The messages I read revealed plans to meet up with someone. Ken, upon seeing my reaction, was incredulous. "Not logged out? That's impossible," he exclaimed. "I can't believe you're accusing me of not logging out after using someone else's computer. Do you even know how to handle work properly? Not logging out is a sign of incompetence." "Please stop, Ken," he pleaded, but I wasn't ready to back down. "I've noticed changes in you and Stacy. If necessary, I can read the emails out loud right here." Ken's face went pale as he abruptly stood up, attempting to snatch the computer from me. I held onto it firmly. "Taking the computer now is pointless," I said. "The data is already saved. Save your effort." Frustrated, Ken shouted, "Just because of a few emails, you think you can accuse me of an affair? That's not enough evidence." I responded, "I've been suspicious for days. I could have confronted you earlier, but I expected excuses. That's why I gathered solid evidence before confronting you." I pulled out my smartphone and opened a specific app. After seeing the emails, something didn't add up, I said. "I've been tracking your location for a while now. Did you not realize?" Ken looked alarmed. "You've been tracking my location. Since when?" "I planted a GPS tracker in your belongings," I revealed. "I knew you were going to Stacy's house after work." Ken began searching through his bag, likely looking for the GPS. "This matches exactly with the time you said you were transferred to a different department and working overtime," I added. "No, that's not it," Ken said, trying to defend himself. "I even checked with your company," I continued. "Turns out, you weren't transferred. You've been leaving work on time every day." "Who told you that?" Ken demanded. I met his gaze steadily. "I've been suspicious for a while." Ken shot back angrily. "If you were suspicious, you should have said something earlier." "And if I had, would you have answered honestly?" "I don't think so." "What about your pay slip?" I asked. "You claim to be working overtime, but there's hardly any overtime pay. Isn't that strange?" Ken was momentarily speechless, his frustration boiling over. "I can't believe you've been sneaking around and investigating me like this." "Don't change the subject," I replied firmly. "What I need to tell you is that this child is yours." John, who had been listening in, looked visibly shocked. "Is it true that Stacy and Ken have a relationship and that this child is Ken's?" he asked. "I'll explain everything," I said, "but first, let me show you something." Stacy quickly jumped in. "It's just Maddie's wild imagination. She's been watching too many TV shows or movies." Stacy's denial only fueled my resolve. Can you still say that after seeing this? I asked, pulling an envelope from a file and holding it up. John looked at the envelope with confusion. What is that? This is the result of a DNA test, I explained. They're quite accessible these days, so I decided to get one done. Does it show a parent-child relationship? Stacy asked, her voice betraying panic. Yes, it does, I confirmed. I had it done by a reputable institution, so there's no mistake. But results can be fabricated, Stacy argued. If you doubt it, so be it, I said. I haven't even opened this envelope since it arrived yesterday evening. Ken's curiosity was piqued. How did you manage to get a sample for the test? I used the tissue that I wiped the child's mouth with when I visited my parents' home, I explained. I carefully cut open the seal with a knife and revealed the test results. This is the test result. Ken's eyes widened in shock. You mean this is real? Yes, I confirmed. The test result clearly shows that Ken is the father. John, who had been busy with work while his wife had an affair with Ken, was visibly devastated. So you were having an affair while I was working, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. It's not like that, Stacy desperately denied. How is it any different? John demanded. How am I supposed to interpret your betrayal? Stacy started crying, trying to explain. I was lonely. I just wanted John to notice me, but he never did, Stacy said, tears streaming down her face. I know being busy with work doesn't justify an affair, but please forgive me, I will do it again, she begged. John pointed to the door, his voice firm. I can't live under the same roof as a traitor. Get out. That's when Ken seemed to have an idea. Stacy, why don't you come to my place? Maddie's there too, and she can handle the housework, he suggested. Stop it, Ken, I interjected. Don't make such ridiculous suggestions. You need to leave my house right now. Ken looked at me in disbelief. What do you mean? Isn't this house our shared property? I replied calmly. Have you forgotten? I was the one who signed the contract and bought the house. At that time, Ken, you couldn't get a loan, so I purchased it in my name. That's a separate issue. Ken argued. Couples are supposed to support each other. I was fed up with his attempts to use lofty words about marital support to his advantage. Enough. Just leave. You're better off with Stacy. You're no longer needed in my life, I declared. In the end, Ken and I decided to divorce. Despite his reluctance, I didn't budge. I hired a divorce lawyer, initiated the process, and demanded fair compensation for my emotional distress. Ken lamented, I can't possibly pay this much. I retorted, you need to take responsibility for your actions. Aren't you ashamed, especially as a parent? Later, Ken married Stacy, but their relationship quickly soured. The initial thrill of the affair faded, and they seemed to be at an impasse. I continued to receive endless complaint emails from both Ken and Stacy, each filled with grievances about the other. Unable to bear their incessant contact, I eventually blocked them on my smartphone. They should be focusing on paying the compensation rather than wasting time on these complaints. Gossip spread quickly about their affair. Stacy complained about being unable to find a part-time job because of the rumor, but it was a consequence of her own actions. Ken, too, faced difficulties. He was losing contracts and credibility as people were unwilling to work with someone involved in such a scandal. He might have finally realized the severity of his actions, but it was too late. He was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of raising his child. As for me, I started working at a nearby craft store after the divorce. Crafting has always been a passion of mine, and I'm thrilled to be surrounded by it. I occasionally teach classes at the store and find immense joy in seeing my projects come to life. Sharing this joy with others has become a source of great satisfaction for me.